Friends, Doc South here. I know a friend of mine, an old friend of mine named Bonnie. Evidently, I think had a birthday not too long ago, and I saw that on Facebook. Sent her, you know, the usual birthday greeting and all that, and she sent back, thanked me, and that kind of thing. Sounds like life's going well for her, and probably one of my oldest friends that I'm still in touch with. You get right down to it. At least every now and then I see her on Facebook, and they live down, I think, down in Florida. Her and her husband Jim, and of course I'm up here in the frozen north. But gee, the other day we all grew up. She and I and a whole mess of friends of mine grew up in Chester, New Jersey. And gee, I passed the old Bonnie's old house the other day, and I got to thinking. I said, "My God, look at that! That house was sort of responsible for me getting into radio and doing stories like I do, writing the stories I do and doing the video blurbs." And I just thought I'd elucidate a little on that. The house is on Main Street. It was about two or three houses down the street from where I lived, where I grew up, Main Street, Chester, and it was a wonderful place to visit. Their home. There were number one. There were so many kids you could almost stay for supper. I mean, yeah, there were so many kids in the house. You could just sit at the table. Mr. Johnson would be playing his guitar and probably having a beer, and he'd look at the table and he'd say, "Wait a minute, you, who are you?" And he'd be pointing at me. I'd say, "Well, I'm one of your kids." "Oh, oh, okay. Gee, I don't remember you that well." "Okay, well, sure. Hey, grab a plate, kid." No, it wasn't quite that bad, but you get the idea. There was always people in the house. Mrs. Johnson, I always remember her always working on something for supper, and yeah, if I recall right, and or she'd sit in on the conversations too. It was funny because sort of like young and old alike, just kind of sat in that house and yacked and hollered and told yarns and stories and spouted out what they believed and all that kind of thing. From politics, religion to where to get the best fishing worms. I mean, it was always something going on, some kind of conversation. And I will tell you this: the times I had in that house were somewhat the basis of my front porch program. I remember it was years later. I was sitting with a friend of mine who was a radio newscaster and a fairly well placed one. And I was describing to him, I said, I used to have these friends, and you could go to their house and we'd just sit and talk, and they'd play their guitars, and we'd try out songs. And I wasn't I wasn't a musician or a singer, but I'd listen to them and all that, and we'd talk and holler about all the stuff going on in the world and making our plans and discussing our successes and failures, and yet through it all there was this music. I said, "Gee, there ought to be I could do a show like that where I get on, I tell stories, I play tunes, invite people over to be guests, and sort of like it was at the old Johnson house." And I remember my friend from the radio news world said, he looked at me with cold steel eyes. He says, they'll never go for that. He says everything's got to be so stinking planned. He said, "I don't know if that show will ever take off." I had a fairly good run. Never made much money at it, but I had a fairly good run with that very idea. I think it's what's missing kind of in radio nowadays, tell you the truth. And because it was all happy stuff. I don't ever recall people getting into arguments, hideous arguments about one thing or another. It was they'd listen to what your side of the story was, tell their side, and if you did disagree, you'd agree to disagree. Yeah, it was kind of nice, wonderful place. They had a back room that overlooked the backyard, and that had a big old pool table in it. So in winter, we'd hang out there. But better than that, when spring arrived into late fall, they had a wonderful front porch. Yeah, right. I had the front porch show, didn't I? And and yeah, of course I had that porch in mind. And it was where we watched the world go by and made our plans and told our tales and sang our songs. It was so fantastic, so fantastic, wonderful people, and we'd I know we'd come up with some new theory. I was always into horse racing. Still love it. I can't afford to go, but I loved it. And I'd be sitting with the stat sheets, the what do they call it, the Morning Telegraph, the horse racing paper with all the stats, and I'd be going over trying to pick what horse would win. People be hanging over my shoulder. Some of my friends. Next, we're in the car heading down to Monmouth Racetrack to throw some money on a nag, and sometimes we won, and then sometimes, well, we. We had to consider maybe hitchhiking home because we ran out of gas. Or maybe we'd say, "Hey, the New York World's Fair, let's go," and we'd all pile into a one car or another, and off we'd head. Yep. And I think it was, and if that family ever left town, the guitar shop in town would have had to close. I think it was an 8 guitar family. There seemed like everyone had an instrument they played, singing and hollering. Oh gosh, it was so cool. Wonderful, wonderful people. And it basically was a house where the bull session was king, and you could be there forever. It seemed just yakking. I do think when our time comes and we wind up in heaven, I think it will be quite a bit like what that house was. I think it will. I have no idea who lives there now. I feel kind of bad because I never see them. If I drive by, I never see anyone on the porch. There's no bicycles in the driveway, or well, nothing like that. And eventually, yeah, like I said, Bonnie, she had a boyfriend then, a good friend of mine named Chet. They eventually parted company. She met a fellow named Jim, and I think they've been married for at least 1,000,000 years now, something like that. And Jim's a great guy. I believe he used to hang out there too. It's just was just amazing. And I often, when I go by there, I kind of just look at the place and says, "Whoa, neat." It's actually, and this is nothing salacious, but it's where I actually got the first time a girl ever kissed me. Yep, yep. But I mean, besides my mom and my grandma and a few aunts, I was on the porch. I was sitting there with Bonnie. One evening, I think it was just her and me. We were just sitting there, and again talking. Nothing, She was on over on one chair. I'm sitting on another, and the night's coming. And the next morning, I was going to leave for Navy boot camp. Yep, it was I had enlisted, and I was I was heading out. Yeah, had to catch the train out to Ohio the next morning. That's where I enlisted. I had to meet the recruiter there, and from there they'd send me over to Columbus, Ohio. There was some fort there where they'd induct you in, and bingo was off to Great Lakes. And I remember we were just talking, Bonnie and I, in the dark there, and again, I said, "Well, I've got to get up awful early. I better get cooking," and I walked Bonnie over to the door, and she says, "Well, you're heading off to the Navy, huh?" She says, "You'll write, right?" I said, "Of course I'll write. I'll have all sorts of stories to tell you and send." She says, "Well, that's good." And she says, "If you're going to be a sailor," she says, "you got to have a kiss." So she gave me a kiss. Yep. And nothing fancy, nothing else, just that. And she says, "Well, you have a good time in boot camp." And something, I took her advice and I did. Yep. Instead of being miserable about everything in the boot camp, I thought, I'm just going to kind of enjoy myself, take notes, write lots of letters, and there you are. And Bonnie wrote quite a bit. She wrote quite a bit. The and other friends from that house. When mail call came, I had more than my share. And I often, like I said, I often think back of that about that family and what wonderful people they were. Yep. Anyway, I thought I'd say it. It was one great part of my life. Now that I think about it. Anyway, I hope you had something like it too. And if not, well, get busy and yeah, yeah, find a room in your house and start inviting people over. And if you were smart, you keep the tape recorder going. Get those stories, okay? Or if you got a good memory, do it that way. But you see what I'm saying. We'll see you later, friends. Thank you and God bless. Bye now.